state, context, and sphere of power. Now, we've just looked at the be, do, have model, and we've summarized how personal alchemy is related to this idea, this metaphorical, poetic idea of magic, being able to bring into your life the kinds of things that you want to have in your life, the kind of results that you want to get. And I mentioned also there that most people get the relationship between doing and having. So they think, right, what is it that I want to get? And then they go out and they start doing things to try and get that. But what a lot of people do, in fact, most people are doing this to some extent or another, most of the time, is they focus their doing energy and attention outside of their sphere of power. And what this means is they spend all their time and energy trying to influence things that they don't have very much influence over, whilst ignoring everything that's inside of their sphere of power, which is their sphere of strong influence. Strong influence. So this is what we mean by sphere of power when we talk about it here. It's really the sphere of strong influence in our lives, and everything outside of that sphere is in the realm of weak influence, and sometimes not influenceable at all. Now, to bring this back down to concrete level, let's think about it in a slightly different way. Imagine that I decide that I want to progress at work. And I decide that the pathway to progressing at work lies in ingratiating myself to my superiors, to having them think certain things about me and see me in a certain way. Imagine it becomes important to me that I come across well. So I start placing a lot of my mental energy and attention on trying to micromanage other people's perceptions of me, because I have an organization of reality that says they have the power and I need to ingratiate myself to them in order that they, I don't know, throw me some scraps from the table and promote me or whatever. Now, a lot of people work this way. They're obsessed with the idea that the power in life lies out there. So what they have to do is manipulate other people's perceptions of them. They need to try and avoid offending people, and they need to try and make a good impression, say the right thing at the right time. And they tie themselves up in knots, trying to influence something which is actually none of their business. And what I mean by none of their business is, if your business is everything in your sphere of power, everything outside of it is none of your business. And here's the thing. You don't get to control. You don't have a lot of power over what somebody thinks of you. And certainly if you have a lot of neediness that they think of you in certain ways, it's going to put you on a very weak footing. So this is one example of placing energy and attention on what is essentially not your business. It's not inside of your sphere of power. It's other people's business. What other people think and feel is not something that you can strongly influence. You can weakly influence it. I'm a hypnotist by profession. It's my job to influence people, but I'm still fully aware that, well, put it this way, if you were to come and learn hypnosis from me, one of the first things I would teach you is that hypnosis is not mind control. You do not get to control other people's minds. You can influence artfully, but this is still the realm of weak influence. And if you're trying to influence artfully from a place of not even being able to influence yourself, as I've said before elsewhere, it's like trying to shoot a cannon from a canoe. You could have great influencing skills, a lot of understanding about how to use conversational hypnosis, for example, but if you don't have a good grounding within yourself, if you are not being, remember the be, do, have model, if you are not being the person you need to be, grounded in yourself to influence strongly, it's like trying to shoot a cannon from a canoe. So what I'm going to encourage you is we focus on our internal sphere of influence, our internal sphere of strong influence, our sphere of power. Let me give you another example, by the way, of what's outside of our sphere of power. You might watch the news and you might get desperately upset about the state of the world. Well, guess what? You can't do anything about that. You can't do anything about it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be aware of what's going on in the world, but if you start finding yourself becoming upset by it, recognize that it's not the events in the world that are upsetting you, it's how you're rendering them up to be. We've already talked about this, how you're making them up to be within yourself. So a lot of the time we're trying to influence things, or we're worrying about things or stressing about things that are outside our sphere of strong influence, outside of our sphere of power. And just to really make this clear, just think for a second how many people you know who go through life complaining about their circumstances. If only things were like this, or if only things were like that, if only that hadn't happened, if only I could just get that, why does this person get this when I don't? What you've got there is an example of somebody who's concerning themselves with things that are outside of their sphere of power. And it makes them weak. The more we focus on what is outside of our sphere of power, the weaker we become in terms of our ability to influence our lives in positive directions. So I already mentioned on one of the earlier audios that this idea comes from Stoicism. And I learned about this from the writings of Epictetus. Now in Stoicism, you have this idea, I think they might call it sphere of control, but it's oftentimes, but this is a translation from ancient Greek or Roman, Latin, sorry. And it's not necessarily a good translation, so sphere of power is a better translation. And as Epictetus points out, the only things we really have power with are our conceptions and our choices. Everything else is outside of our sphere of power. So if I'm in a place where I'm desperate to affect somebody else's emotional state because it's not okay with me that they think badly towards me, I'm in a weak place because I'm focusing my energy and attention outside of my sphere of power. Why? Because I can't change their conceptions. That's what would need to happen to change their experience of me, is to change their conceptions. If I'm trying to directly change their conceptions, I'm in a weak place that's outside of my sphere of influence. I need to come back to my conceptions, how I'm making things up to be. And the other place is with my choices. So sphere of power. This is an important thing because for two reasons. Number one, if you're on this program because you want to transform how you're being in the world, because you want to get different results in your life, then you are going to get those different results not by focusing on trying to micromanage that which is in your realm of weak influence, but you're going to get those results by constantly and continually coming back to your realm of strong influence, your sphere of strong influence, your sphere of power, and looking at your being, your trance repertoires, your conceptualizations, these sorts of things, because this is from this that the choices that you have in terms of action emerge. So this is the place to keep bringing your attention back to, how it is you are being. So to put this on a ground level, if you're trying to micromanage other people's minds, other people's perceptions, stop worrying about how you're coming across to other people and start thinking about your own experience and being who you would want to be for you from the inside out. Okay? Because any conceptualization of reality that puts the power out there puts you in a weak place. Start conceptualizing. This is an advice piece, by the way, here. You don't have to take it. It's just advice. Start learning to conceptualize yourself as the seat of your own power to show up and engage in the world. The power is inside of you. Start organizing your reality with the power inside of you. When I sit down and I listen to clients speak, I'm always listening for how have they got their reality organized in terms of power. Do they organize their reality in terms of the power being out there, or do they organize their reality in terms of the power being within themselves? So this is a piece of side advice here. So how does this relate to context and state? Well, we talked before about how trances emerge within contexts because there are contextual triggers. So let's use a workplace situation again. Let's imagine I'm at work and there's a particular context when my boss comes in and behaves in a particular way. It triggers a response inside of me and I start worrying about whether the boss is judging me or whatever. we've got a context, which is the events that are happening, and then we've got the trance that emerges within them, or the state that I drop into. Context and state. And the state that I drop into includes all of the conceptualizations that I run. There's no such thing as a state, really. There's just an unfolding of mental conceptualizations and the feelings and felt senses that emerge from those. That is the trance. So we got context, we got state, or the trance that emerges from it. Now, looking at this in terms of sphere of power, we don't really have any power with the context. The circumstances that are unfolding around us are the circumstances that are unfolding around us. They are what they are. Where we have power is in how we engage with those. And we engage with them through the trances that emerge. So this is why we want to get right in and start transforming our trances, transforming our conceptualizations, transforming our beingness, because this is where we have real power in life. If you do not do this, if you continue to run your conceptualizations and run your trances, i.e. have the same states emerging within the same context, and especially if you're looking out at those contexts which lie outside of your sphere of power and you're trying to micromanage or change them directly at the level of doing rather than the level of being, you are likely to find yourself more often than not being sort of washed away by the chaos wave of life rather than being able to elegantly surf the chaos wave of life. Now, what I've just described to you is something of immense value. It is something of immense value. I'm going to state that in absolutistic terms. It is something of immense value. And it's also something which is hugely counterintuitive to most people. Most people are operating at the level of doing, trying to micromanage what they perceive as the powers that are outside of themselves, rather than connecting to the power inside of themselves, grounding themselves in their sphere of power and becoming adept at being how they need to be to meet, to dance with the chaos of life in creative and generative ways. If this is the first time you've encountered this concept, this is probably going to be a head job for you. You may need to listen to this audio a few times over. I would certainly encourage you to ask me questions about this to get clarity on this, because this is a mother of a mind shift. When you get this mind shift, when you start grounding into your sphere of power, when you start reorganizing your perceptions of reality and getting where your power lies, when you start really focusing on your trance repertoires, trances of being, and make this the place where you change things, always be coming back to this place, always catching yourself when your attention goes into the realm of weak influence and bringing it back to the realm of strong influence, to the realm of power, your sphere of power. When you do this, this is a massive game changer in terms of life. Not just in terms of the magic of creating the results that you want to create in your life, but also in terms of your experience of being in the world on just a basic level of well-being and enjoying things. So this is a huge game changer. Go back through this again, generate the questions you want to generate. I've suggested on previous audios that you keep a journal for yourself. Jot the questions down. Go back over this audio, really start to explore what's being pointed towards in this.